Hi, this is Fred Hess of Hess Consulting. Today I'd like to discuss how the power of process can help to improve a business, hopefully your business. This video is based on a presentation I made way back in 2008 at the Brainstorm Conference and is the first in a series of presentations about how the power of process can drive business improvement. So please return to this channel and check out the rest of the series. Let's talk about the term process. According to Michael Hammer in his book Agenda, process is the Clark Kent of business ideas, as it is seemingly mild and unassuming, but actually amazingly powerful. Now, I ascribe to his statement, and it has turned out for me to be a very powerful technique to help me analyze and improve a business. Just so you know what I am talking about, here is an example of a process in a process model. But before we dive into the details, let's define what a process is. According to the GAO, a process is a set of activities that produce products and services for customers. That's not very helpful for what we want to do, but Michael Hammer cleared it up again out of his book, Agenda. He says a process is an organized group of related activities that together create a result of value to customers. Now that has a little more meaning to me. I think the key words are together and result of value. Now in my consulting, I use the term process as a proxy for a business operation, which is comprised of process steps or activities, people, and tools. But it also includes knowledge and experience, a skill level that the people in the business process must have in order to make it successful. This helped my clients understand what we were about to do. Now let's talk about the process model elements. Here is the process model I showed you earlier. Most models will look something like this, but there will be variations, of course. Now let's talk about the elements that make it up. The key elements are role, the data object or the information flowing through the process, the tasks or activities, the path that the process follows, and the application or software or the tool that is used to help execute the process. The first we'll talk about is the role, which represents a skill or an authority. The process model is arranged so that all of the tasks for a specific role are in a lane, like an Olympic pool, and that's why we call these rows in a process model swim lanes. Now, swim lanes are an important concept, and you will see shortly how they help get additional information out of the model. So why did we pick role instead of people's names or organizations for this element? Well, employee names would not be a good choice because if they got promoted or leave, you have to substitute somebody else's name in there. The other element name that you might consider is organization, whether it's a group, division, or a department. Now, this is not a good idea because if the company reorganizes, then the process model is no longer valid. We have found that role is the best way to define the lanes in the process model. As I mentioned, a role is defined as a skill level or a responsibility. So it could be a clerk, administrator, a buyer, a loan officer, or escrow officer, for example. These kinds of titles are good to use as role names. You could also have a role that is an authority, which would be a manager or just an approver. You may not be sure who is actually going to do the approving, but you know that a role has to perform the approval or disapproval task. The other advantage of using roles is that a person can wear several hats or perform several different skills. For example, if they're doing the actual work, they are in one role, a worker role. But if they are managing or approving, then they are in the manager role. I'm sure that you have probably spent time in different roles at some time in your work history. Now, the next one we're going to talk about is data object. The pink phi symbol represents data objects that are used in the execution of the task. They are the inputs and outputs of these tasks. They typically are documents or data records if they are electronic. In this process, the offer to buy is an example of a paper form, but it could also be faxed or scanned. If it were in digital form, it could be electronically transferred and executed. We will talk more about paths in a minute, but the green line is the path that shows how the offer to buy gets from the buyer who fills it out and then sends it to the seller who accepts the offer in this case. Now, what we call this is a handoff, and that's where a data object goes from one role to another, an event where things can go wrong. Handoffs are great places to look for problems that could be related to issues in the business. Do the terms dropping the ball or falling into a crack ring a bell? The next element to discuss, the big green blocks, are the tasks. Prepare offer, accept offer, prepare loan package. Those are examples of tasks or activities. In the task object, we capture important details, such as the description, elapsed time, and the resource time. These two times are different. Elapsed time means how long did that task take to execute, while the resource time is how much time the person performing the role spent on that task. The task element can also contain what data comes into that task, is used to perform it, and what data is output as a result of performing the task. In addition, you can capture the application or the system description, which is what the system does. Now, I will show you in just a minute why we need it, but it is important to capture that information. The next element to discuss is the path. The lines on the diagram show the path that the output objects take to get from one task to another. If your plan is to improve this process, it is important for you to identify how the object travels and how long it takes. For example, this object can be hand-carried, can be mailed, or FedExed, or sent electronically, or any number of other ways to move the object between tasks. You can see that these methods would have widely differing transit times. The final element we will discuss is the application or computer system used in executing the process. With a wide variety of technology available everywhere these days, it is important for a business to maximize the use of technology to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of your business activities and processes. A process model is great for doing this. In our model, we will capture the name of the system or application in the task element, as I previously mentioned. We will also capture what the application does in the support of each task. For example, here is an application called the Loan Processing System. And when the loan officer executes the Prepare Loan Package task, he uses the Loan Processing System to execute it. There are two activities that occur and should be captured. The first is what the loan officer does in preparing for and using the system, and the second is what the system does to support the loan officer in execution of the task. So that's a summary of process model elements. Now let's discuss how a process model has power to improve your business. There are at least 4 benefits you can get other than just defining the process. First, the process model can be a proxy for the elapsed time. In other words, by finding out and compiling how much time each task in the process takes to execute, you can get an estimate for the elapsed time from the starting point to the end point in the process. So if this is the current state model, then you know approximately how long this process segment takes to execute and can compare this with some of your measurements that your company has taken. This is a powerful use of a process model that can help you start analyzing how the elapsed time can be reduced. Here is an interesting rule of thumb that you can use. In all of the processes I've done, I have found that I can predict what percentage of time is spent executing the tasks in this process compared to the elapsed time of the process. That percentage runs no higher than 5 or maybe 10% of the total time that the process takes. In other words, there is a lot of time that the tasks in this process are not being executed. That was brought out in Michael Hammer's book, The Agenda, when IBM was in the computer business. They only leased computers to their customers. Then there was a lawsuit, and the judgment said that they had to sell computers, not just lease them. So IBM consented to do that. They then got into the credit business and decided to hold the paper for their customers buying their computers. Then they found out that their competitors were winning the business because IBM's process took too long. It actually took about 2 weeks from the time the customer applied for the loan until they could deliver an agreement. Several of the IBM people in the process thought it really can't take that long. So they hand-carried the paperwork through all the steps and found that the total time they actually worked on the agreement in the 2-week process was 1.5 hours. In other words, the resource they spent preparing the actual agreement was only 90 minutes out of 80 hours of elapsed time. That's less than 2%. With a process model, you can estimate the amount of time that you actually spent working on one instance of this process. So, armed with the knowledge that in most processes there is 90% slack time, or the white space, as I call it, you can now target any process with that information, and improvements of, say, 35 to 50% are fairly easy to achieve. The next valuable piece of information that you can get out of a process model is the ability to identify the amount of resource, people, spent on this instance, and therefore estimate the cost of executing it. In other words, if you knew how long each role spent on each task, and then multiply that time by the cost rate for each of these roles, then you can estimate the total cost of execution. In this particular process, the buyer and seller are actually not inside the loan company, so we can only improve the execution of those roles that I've pointed out. So if this were the current state process and you redesigned it for efficiency, you could estimate the cost savings by using the same approach. We will be showing you how to do that in future movies. The third benefit that a process model can give you is tool requirements. By tool, I mean software application. There are 2 applications that we have identified in this process: a loan processing system and an escrow application system. Now, if the application were used for more than one task, you could capture what the system has to do to support each of the tasks and then compile them. This becomes the tool requirements for that particular system and is valuable to use to compare to the capabilities of your existing tool. I've had several clients who have used this technique to prepare an RFP, request for proposal, to buy a new system, and it worked very well. An additional benefit is that if this task uses more than one tool, these requirements can be used to determine any integration opportunity. I have found that sometimes people are doing the integration by cutting and pasting data from one tool into another. One final benefit of the model is that you can obtain skill requirements for each of the roles. In other words, if you want to create a skill requirement or a job requirement for the escrow officer, you would then compile the descriptions for all the tasks that they must do in executing this process. This will become the job description or the skill requirement for that particular role for executing this process. HR people love this because it's very clear what that role must do and what skill level they must have in order to properly execute this process. This requirement set that's developed is also excellent for developing a training program. So that's an overview of the power of process for improving your business. Let's summarize the features and benefits of a process model. The process model captures how a process is executed using roles, tasks, data objects, paths, and applications. These can be analyzed and rearranged or changed to improve the execution in order to better meet the needs of the business. The major benefits you can get out of a process model are you can use it to help improve the schedule or the elapsed time. It can help you reduce the resources used in the execution of the process. You can use it to define tool application requirements, and you can use it to develop or define skill requirements. In the next episode, we will be discussing common issues that we find in businesses of all sizes. So please return to this channel and leave any comments below. Thank you very much.